Hello and welcome to our webinar. My name is Tatiana Gaspar. I'm the Managing Director of the Latin American Chamber of Commerce in Switzerland. We have a large audience registered today from both sides of the Atlantic. Thank you all for joining this webinar on COVID-19, challenges and opportunities for Swiss business in Brazil and Mexico. It is my great pleasure to welcome and introduce our two guest speakers, Philippe Praz, Director of the Swiss Business Hub in Sao Paulo, and Rubén Araiza Díaz, Director of the Swiss Business Hub in Mexico. Thank you both so much for being with us today. And of course, a warm welcome to our moderator and honorary ambassador of the Chamber, Dr. Philippe Nell. Please be advised that we are recording this session. The recording will be posted on our website. After the formal part, which will last about 45 minutes, there will be time for Q&A. Please submit your questions in writing. Our webinar is very timely. COVID-19 affects every sector of life in 188 countries around the world and raises great concerns. Speaking of Latin America, Brazil and Mexico set the pace. Both of them members of the G20, they are by far the two largest economies, accounting for 52% of the population and 61% of GDP of the region. Their internal markets have a great potential for business. Switzerland has established strong ties with both countries. Economic agreements, joint economic commissions, bilateral chambers of commerce, business hubs, and scientific cooperation provide a strong anchor to dynamic trade and investment relations. Needless to say, both economies are very important for Swiss business. Let me now hand over to our moderator, Dr. Philippe Nell.
Thank you very much, Tatiana. Let me also warmly welcome our two guest speakers, Philippe Praz from Sao Paulo and Rubén Araiza Díaz from Mexico City. It's a great pleasure to have you with us this afternoon. I also like to welcome a large audience from Latin America and from Switzerland, as well as several ambassadors representing Switzerland from Latin America here. Thank you very much for being with us. Before turning to the speakers, let me set briefly the background for our discussion. Business is concerned today with two issues. The first one is how severe will the health crisis and the recession be? And the second one is how will the recovery look like? Will it differ between the two countries, Brazil and Mexico? Brazil and Mexico display significant differences. The share of trade to GDP is much larger for Mexico than for Brazil. With high tariffs, taxes, and non-tariff barriers, Brazil is a complex market which has remained fairly protected. Conversely, Mexico has set priority on market access and elimination of trade barriers, establishing future relations with more than 50 countries, including the US, the European Union, Japan, Switzerland, and its European Free Trade Association partners. Looking at Latin America, Brazil has more trade with the region than Mexico. This is also the fact that Brazil, with Mercosur, has a customs union with Argentina, Paraguay, and Uruguay, and Brazil has also close ties with Chile in terms of trade and investment. On the other hand, Mexico is strongly integrated in US value chains and belongs to North America. Mexico's participation in the Pacific Alliance and a number of partial trade agreements with countries in South America established also a strong link between Mexico and South America. For Swiss business, Brazil and Mexico are a must. Almost 60% of Swiss trade with Latin America is being undertaken with Mexico and Brazil. And more than 50% of Swiss foreign investment in Latin America go to Brazil and Mexico. This implies that Swiss business is highly interested to follow closely economic, political, and legal developments in both countries. They presently face a severe recession. Business knows, however, that as in China, and now in Europe and the United States, the challenge of the COVID-19 will be met and that normal life will resume. Economic forecasts are essential to plan business operations and investments. The following questions are in the mind of all business persons. For instance, will the recovery be a U-shape or a V-shape? When will growth resume? How strongly will government support the economy? Will the exchange rate recover? And what about inflation? Are there any risk of debt failures? According to experts, the recovery path is not likely to be a V-shape for Latin America, as containment measures are very, very difficult to implement. Now let me turn quickly to Brazil. In Brazil, according to experts, GDP is expected to fall by 5.5% this year. Agriculture should nevertheless avoid a recession amid demand from China and within Brazil. Farming is a very important sector in Brazil, accounting for 5.3% of GDP. Farming has also significant downstream effects on industry and services. This will help the economy. Despite support by the government with a budget deficit of 12% of GDP in this year, manufacturing and services will be hard hit. There is a 10% fall now in the second quarter of this year. The exchange rate has depreciated by more than 25% from a year from now, but it should recover by the end of the year or next year. The public GDP ratio will increase by 15 points to 90% of GDP by the end of the year. But business is interested in what comes next. And for next year, the economy should get back to growth with some 3.7%. Inflation should remain subdued, 3.6% next year, and the budget deficit should decrease around 7% of GDP and then go further down thereafter. The good news is that foreign and domestic debt will remain manageable. Important reforms are underway, but they will be postponed, and they will be discussed a little later this afternoon by Philippe Praz. Another element important for us, we may also discuss, refer to the ambitious free trade agreements concluded by Brazil with Mercosur, with the European Union, and with EFTA. Now, let me turn to Mexico. The pattern will be similar to Brazil, but with a much sharper fall of GDP. Experts see 9.5% this year, with stronger decline of private consumption and investment. Because there's a reason, because the stimulus by the Mexican government is expected to be small. Mexico's budget deficit will only increase by 3 points to 4.7% GDP. Budget deficit to GDP, and then gradually decline during the following years. The government will keep a conservative expenditure policy, despite a debt-GDP ratio of 54%. Inflation will fall to 2.8% by next year. Interest rates will have an average of 8%. Now, remittances, remesas in Spanish, remittances are very important in Latin America, in particular for Mexico, and with the situation in the US and elsewhere, they will fall significantly. The exchange rate has depreciated by 31% since January, but then by end of April until now, it has recovered and been reduced to 15%. So shifts can be very, very sudden. A long-term prospect to the export-oriented manufacturing sector of Mexico remained good with low wages, a relatively skilled workforce, and deep integrations in US value chain. Tourism also should recover once the virus is contained. As in Brazil, GDP will grow more next year by 3% for Mexico. However, the 2018 GDP will only be reached again in 2024, and in terms of income per capita, it may even take longer because the population is being growing. Referring to reforms, also, Rubén Araiza Díaz will give us the opportunity to look into that in a few minutes from now. This was my introduction, and now I'm very pleased to turn to Sao Paulo with Philippe Praz, the director of the Swiss Business Hub, who is going to give us some first-hand information on the main measures taken by Brazil in order to counter the COVID-19, on support the economy and face it to the best of the government. Thank you very much. So, Philippe Praz, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you, Philippe. Well, good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, everybody. I would like first to thank the LATCAM and also Philippe for inviting me for this very interesting initiative. And I'm very pleased to participate with you, explaining and sharing with you some insights regarding the situation in Brazil. So regarding the situation with the COVID-19 crisis, you may have read in the newspaper that the situation has become critical in Brazil. And despite the partial lockdown decided by the majority of states in Brazil in mid of March already, it means 11 weeks ago, the numbers of infected persons continue to increase. We are now around 25,000, 30,000 new cases per day. That's quite high numbers. And also the number of deaths, unfortunately, continue to increase. Since now 2 weeks, we have an average of over 1,000 deaths per day. That's also quite high. So this means that on one side, we will still have very difficult weeks in front of us, and the virus will not decline by mid of June as it was expected. And the population is getting frustrated because they are doing a lot of efforts. They are trying to follow the rules and they don't see a concrete result. So there is a little bit a kind of frustration and also a pressure from everywhere to restart activities. Now coming back to the measures that the Brazilian government has taken, I would like to share my screen with you just to present one slide that I've prepared. So I guess you have now. The measures that the Brazilian government has decided can be divided in three categories. We have first categories, which are measures to support, for the social support and health support. Under this category, there are, for example, the measure to protect the people, like the social distancing, like the obligation to wear a mask when you are outside. That's mandatory here in Brazil. And also the closing of non-essential business since March. It means majority of the business are closed, the school are closed, gathering are not more allowed. So that's the first packet of measures. Then a very important one is the one concerning this financial support for the informally working sector. And this means 600 reais per month and about $110 US per month. And this measure will last for the next 3 months. That's probably the most prominent measures of the package. And this measure will reach out most vulnerable persons. The initial cost of this measure was estimated at 9 million. And this measure was, at the beginning, when the government has decided to implement this measure, they were calculating that more or less 20 million persons will benefit from that. At the end, we have now 35 million persons who have been registered in this program. That's huge, a huge number. And this means that, of course, the budget of $9 billion won't be enough. And also this gives a good picture, or a certain picture of the dimension of the informal economy in Brazil, because we can say that 1/3 of the workforce are working informally. Then we have a reinforcement of the Bolsa Familia, that was the famous program introduced by Lula. On the economic side, so the measures that we can, that I can mention here, that there is, first of all, some measures regarding the relaxation of labor laws, like, for example, the reduction of working hour. That's what we have in Switzerland, Kurzarbeit. Anticipation of vacation also. It means that employees can be obliged to take their vacation now during the quarantine. And also in some special cases, the suspension of employment contract for 2 months, 60 days. There is then, in order to prevent the liquidity of the companies, the possibility for the postponement of pay taxes and the social contribution for the companies. Then also, in order to prevent the liquidity, the National Development Bank has decided to extend new line of credit. And in the end, we also have 60 billions, it means 11 billions as a support package for the municipalities. And then we have some trade measures. And under the trade measure, I can mention temporary relief of import tax on health equipment, also on simplification for the custom clearance of equipment destined to combat COVID-19. And at the end, the Brazilian, as other countries, have also decided to ban export of medical products that are now used for the fight against the COVID-19. So that's the measures decided by the Brazilian government. And then there is also a last comment, or a last comment that I will add now, last reflection. I will scroll down to the next slides, and it's this one. What do we have to expect with the second wave? What will be worse, the COVID wave or the recession wave? And I'm quite sure that you have been following a little bit this never-ending discussion or fight. Here in Brazil, we have on one side Bolsonaro, the president, who doesn't want to appear as responsible for breaking down the economy, who say we have to continue to work like normal. And on the other side, you have the governors who wants to preserve the population and also the health system. You have to keep in mind that Brazil is a federalism state, a country, so it means that the health sector are under the competency of the different states. Okay, well, in my opinion, it's not right to oppose these two dimensions, and it would be more clever to integrate them, and then based on what is the priority to decide if we have to save lives or jobs. What I found very disappointing in Brazil in terms of the management of the crisis is that in such difficult times, the political leader of this country, instead of joining forces to find the common, to have a common fight, it means the virus, they've decided to start a political war, and that's very negative. If we look at the example of Switzerland and how this country, Switzerland, succeeded in winning this battle, we see that working together was really a key factor for this success. So, Philippe, I'll give back to you. That's my point. So, my first remark regarding this COVID-19 and the situation now in Brazil.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe, for your very clear, straightforward presentation of the measures taken by Brazil. And I'm immediately going to fly now to Mexico, and I am pleased to give the floor to Rubén Araiza Díaz. Please.
Well, thank you, Philippe, for giving me the floor. Hello, everybody that is attending this webinar. We're very happy to be with you today and to share some important information on how Swiss companies are acting during this crisis in Mexico and in Brazil. Just allow me to show also my screen with you to show a slide to answer the question that I was addressed by Mr. Nell. Okay, well, in Mexico, the government declared a voluntary quarantine in March, and since COVID-19 began, different measures have been adopted. A system similar to a traffic light has been implemented throughout the country to reactivate the sectors of the economy state by state. For this purpose, a color was assigned. You can see in the slide that the red means only essential work activities will be allowed. Orange, non-essential activities are included, but at a reduced level of these. Yellow, working in essential and non-essential activities can be done without major restriction in public spaces. And there will be minor restrictions, but yet attending to class will not be possible. And finally, green, which means that there are no health restrictions in any of the activities, but this phase is mainly characterized by the reactivation of the school activities in the whole country. As for the economic support, the President Andrés Manuel López Obrador rejected calls for fiscal stimulus on the basis that the government should not take on debt to support companies. The administration reoriented $10 billion in government spending towards programs targeted at helping the poorest. However, the government did not announce any economic support or measures for large and middle-sized companies or workers. However, in the absence of the government support, states and the private sector stepped into the void and they reacted. States offered to suspend tax payment for businesses, and Mexico's powerful private business group called Consejo Coordinador Empresarial, in collaboration with the IDB Invest, which is part of the Inter-American Development Bank, agreed $12 billion in loans to help Mexican small and medium-sized enterprises to face the crisis. Banseco, which is the central bank, cut the monetary policy rate by 20 basis points, leaving the rate at 6%, and they also offered several other stimulus measures amounting to $30 billion to support the economy. Which one? Increased liquidity, a corporate bond repurchasing facility, and lending for businesses. But what have been doing the Swiss companies within this crisis? Well, most of them also supported the crisis. The Swiss Chamber of Commerce in Mexico created a consortium for the welfare of Mexico in April. All this through a platform that gives visibility to the support provided by the Swiss companies for donations and concrete actions. Of course, that the Mexican government weak response to the coronavirus will hit the investment hard, especially bearing in mind that uncertainty prevails regarding the cancellation of infrastructure contracts by the current government. It's also very important to let you know that our president, Mr. López Obrador, has relied on public consultations in the form of referendums on several policy issues and investment projects. And this has been used to cancel multi-billion-dollar investment projects. The National Statistics Institute, INEGI, reported on April that business confidence suffered a brutal hit. Just as an example, Confidence for manufacturing slumped by more than 6 points. Whether manufacturers believe that now is the right moment to invest. Commerce showed the sharpest decline, more than 6 points too. Companies believing that it's the right time to invest plunged by 12 points. And construction declined by more than 6 points. This is the result of the measures taken by the government to support the economy. As previously mentioned by Philippe Nell, Mexico will experience a sharper fall of its GDP, minus 9.5% in 2020, with a stronger decline of private consumption and investment, because the stimulus by the Mexican government, as I mentioned it, is very limited. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Rubén, for your presentation, for your statement. I think you point to very important elements here. And indeed, a difference we already see now with between Brazil and Mexico is that in Mexico, there are two factors now playing in terms of forecast for business, in terms that some multi-billion projects were not going to take place, were cancelled by the government. They had been forcing to be done. And in addition to that, now we had the COVID-19 crisis, on which also the government decided not to put an important stimulus. But I think some important points you made here were to show us that at the level of a central bank, at the level of the states, and also the cooperation with the Inter-American Development Bank, some important stimulus have been put into place, therefore, in order to maintain as much economic activity as possible. On the side of Brazil, it was very interesting also to see that the actions were, as with Mexico, geared toward poor sections of the population, but also they were geared toward various labor measures and also some additional programs, fairly substantial programs to further stimulate the economy. This being said, we could now turn to Brazil to look with Philippe Praz how the Swiss companies do react in terms of this particular crisis. And to start, I would like to ask you to tell us a few words. How do you see Swiss firms' position and investments in Brazil? Are they mostly in Brazil for the domestic market? And do some use Brazil as a platform for exports to Latin America and elsewhere? So I will give you back the floor, Philippe. Thank you.
Philippe, we can't hear you.
You can't hear me?
I can hear you again. I switched on my microphone now. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're coming on fine.
Yes.
Okay. Just coming back to the measure that I just explained right now. In mid of April, I was doing a survey, conducting a survey among most of the Swiss companies present here in Brazil, and they all told me that all these measures decided by the Brazilian government, they were using this measure. It means that it was really useful for them. Now, if you want to come back to the landscape of the presence of the Swiss companies here in Brazil, what I can say, first of all, as Philippe, you have mentioned in your introduction, Brazil is a very important partner for the Swiss economy. Indeed, the country is our most important trade partner in Latin America. In 2019, Switzerland exported 2.6 billion Swiss francs of goods to Brazil and imported 1.4 billion Swiss francs. If we consider the size of the country, we can deduct that there is still room for improvement. I will now share my screen again to illustrate to you the presence of the Swiss companies here. So I scroll down and we'll comment a little bit this slide. So as you can see on this chart, Switzerland exports a wide range of products to Brazil, reflecting also the diversification of our economy. It's not very surprising to see that pharmaceutical and chemical products are dominating our export. Then we have 9.2% for mineral fuel oils distillation product. That's more or less, let's say, activities related to companies like Clariant or Ciba here in Brazil. And then we have all our technical part. It means medtech product, machinery product, electronical product, etc. If we speak of the presence of the Swiss company here in Brazil, we have registered around 470 companies. Most of our major companies like Nestlé, ABB, Schindler, they have a strong commitment with Brazil, with a presence in this country over more than 100 years. And they continue to invest in the country. It means they still believe in opportunities that we can find here in Brazil. Nestlé, for example, invests in average 50 million Swiss francs per year. If we consider the pharma industry, we have, of course, the big players like Roche and Novartis, present for many years now in Brazil, and recently also Ferring has entered the market. It's important to mention that these pharmaceutical companies not only have a production plant in Brazil, but they are also carrying out some research activities in collaboration with Brazilian Research Institute. They invest in clinical trials, for example, and they are also interested in setting up laboratories for some treatment of cancer or rare diseases. The medtech sector is also very important, and Brazil is a very promising country for Swiss SMEs. Many of our companies are already present here through subsidiary or distributors. Each year in May in Sao Paulo, we have Hospitalar. That's an important medtech fair where Swiss companies can join our Swiss pavilion. On the odontology sector is also very, very interesting for Swiss companies here. And many companies have registered a very successful experience in this market. That's, for example, the case of the company Straumann, which is a leader in Brazil for dental implants. The company is growing very fast, and in order to respond to the demand, not only in Brazil, but also in the neighborhood country, they've invested in a new plant in Curitiba. On the odontology sector, another example that I can bring is the example of Curadan. Curadan, it's a manufacturer of toothbrushes in Switzerland. I have heard for Curadan when I came to Brazil. In the time I was living in Switzerland, I never heard of this company. But in Brazil, they are so successful, despite the fact that their product cost more than double than the product for their concurrent, for example. But they have done a very good job. They have done a good marketing, a good positioning of the product, and they are very, very successful. Then if we speak of Brazil, of course, we have to mention the agribusiness, which is, as you have mentioned before, Philippe, the engine of the Brazilian economy. And it will increase, the sector will also increase in the future demand for innovation product, because they have the ambition to be one of the most important world leader for food production, or most important world supplier in food product. So we have here companies like Syngenta, Bühler, for example, but we also have some smaller company acting in specific area in Brazil. I can bring you, for example, the case of Energetic. That's a Swiss SME based in the region of Singalen. And the company is offering sustainable solution for the agriculture, like biofertilizer. And they are now entering the market, the Brazilian market, and we are helping this company to find the right partner in Brazil. So that's a very positive sign. And also we have to keep in mind this fact when the discussion about the free trade agreement will start in Switzerland. Just to keep in mind that the Brazilian agriculture is not only fertilizer, let's say, chemical product, but they also have they also use biofertilizer, and they have also this concern about the environmental. And finally, we also receive always more requests from startups. These companies are following another path than the traditional one. They are born global, and if they see an opportunity in Brazil, they jump in. So last year, for example, at the Fair Hospitalar, the Swiss startup D-Cube participated to the Swiss Pavilion. That's a young Swiss company that is using imaging and intelligence artificial to detect skin cancer, for example. We are also helping startups in the area, in the fintech area, which is very promising in Brazil. There is a great interest from the fintech community in Brazil about Switzerland, and during many years we've been trying to attract Brazilian companies in this area to Switzerland, and we have succeeded in these cases. And now we also see possibilities for Swiss companies coming to Brazil and acting in this area. And finally, I can mention also regarding startup, the presence here in Brazil of many young companies from the drone sector, like for example, Flyability, Pix4D. These companies sees in Brazil many opportunities, and mostly in the area of the agribusiness also. If we speak of the geographical distribution of this company in Brazil, of course, São Paulo, the state of São Paulo, and then the south states of Brazil are the area where we have the biggest concentration of the Swiss companies. Over 80–85% of our companies are located in these areas. And of course, they are here to serve the Brazilian market, but not only. And in the case they have a production plant in Brazil, of course, this production also will be distributed in other countries from the LATAM region. And for example, in the Mercosur countries, in order to optimize their presence here and to take advantage to some common standards that we can find in these countries in Latin America. So that's more or less my points regarding the presence of the Swiss company here in Brazil. And I give you the word to you, Philippe, again.
Okay, thank you very much. So we take note with great interest that Switzerland has a strong investment position, and that despite the present crisis, the companies are investing. They are investing for the future, and therefore they continue to strengthen their position in Brazil. On the trade side, the situation is indeed for this year is going to be difficult. From January till April this year, Swiss trade overall around the world declined by some 6%. And if you look at Brazil for specific products where we are most interested, in organic chemicals, we have a -7%, and in medical equipment, -22%, in machinery, -23%, in watches, -23%. So this is based on the particular crisis we are we are facing right now. However, in pharmaceuticals, we have a plus 2%. And also in electrical machines, there we have a positive number. So I do not know if you want to just in 2 minutes, because time is running, give us a small appreciation on the trade side linked to the strong decline that companies will have to face this year with Brazil. Microphone.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So I scroll down to the next slide. That illustrates a little bit who are the potential losers and the potential winners of this crisis. And of course, on the red side, tourism, leisures, that's not very surprising. That's the situation that we will find in mostly all the countries. You have to keep in mind that at the moment, the borders are still closed for foreigners. It means tourism, but also business trips are not allowed in Brazil. This will last at least until end of June, and then end of June we will see if the government will decide to relieve this interdiction for entry, or if it will once again decided for another period. So that's for tourism. Of course, aviation, maritime sector also is very affected by the crisis. That's concerned, for example, Swiss. They have to stop their flights to Brazil by mid-March. They will maybe start again around July. We'll see. We also have, for example, Mediterranean Shipping Company, who has an important presence in Brazil, and for them also it's a very difficult time. And the automotive sector, which is important for Brazil, it represents 5% of the GDP. And for this sector, the recovery won't be easy. Also, the car dealers, they have to close their business for many weeks now. They are facing huge stock of unsold car, and the consumer confidence is missing. And really, if they want to restart the business, they will have to reduce their price. We have here in Brazil, for example, Autoneum, which is a world leader in acoustic and thermal solution for the car. And I was speaking with the CFO of this company, and he confirmed to me these challenges. Then when we see, if we want to look a little bit on the positive side, there is also some positive news that we can think about concerning this very particular situation. And that's, for example, all these new trends that we have seen during the past week, and this new interest for the digitalization solution. For example, e-commerce, in the past, we did not promote international e-commerce solution in Brazil, mainly because of the complexity of the importation process. And now we see that we have some news companies, trading companies who are offering interesting solutions. And this could be a new way to do business with Brazil. If we think then, another interesting development is with the authorization of the telemedicine solution that was not permitted in Brazil, and due to coronavirus and the difficulties for some patients to meet their doctor, this is now relieved temporarily, but you know, in Brazil, sometimes temporarily can last for an eternity. So we have prepared some information regarding this aspect that we will be promoting on the website of Switzerland Global Enterprise. And persons who are interested to look a little bit deeper in this area, we are still at their disposal for giving other information. And of course, the health sector, we see very promising opportunities. with innovative solutions and services in this sector. For example, if we think of the monitoring or managing of the patient flow, and of course for pharmaceutical product, there will be an increased demand due to COVID-19 because the number of patients under treatment is relatively high at this moment. And then because agribusiness is always driving in a sector where in Brazil, all new solution, innovative solution in this sector could be also very interesting. The last point that I wanted to make also, and concerning the recovery in Brazil will pass through an important program for the privatization of infrastructure. And we already have here Zurich Airport, which is one of the major players in the privatization of airport in Brazil. The government will announce now new possibility in this area with the privatization of highway, railway, also in sanitation and water treatment, urban mobility, etc. So this program will offer new opportunities for Swiss suppliers. And in this regard, also at Switzerland Global Enterprise, we have a special working group that can be useful or that can help Swiss SMEs who are interested to know a little bit more about opportunity in this area.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe. I think it was very instructive. And what I would retain is that when we look at your slide and the potential losers and winners, we see that we really do face a global crisis with COVID-19, because we could draw about the same industries for the United States or here for Europe. Therefore, the sensitive sectors are sensitive in Brazil. They're also sensitive here in Switzerland, in Europe, or in the United States. What I found also most interesting is the program of the government now to privatize further different areas of the economy. And here, indeed, we know that investors are looking for opportunities based on the very low returns now that we have on the treasury bills and obligatory markets, and also in order to sharing technology. Zurich Flughafen is already running airports in Latin America and also in Brazil. And in terms of railways, we know that Switzerland has comparative advantages. Now, if you allow me, Philippe, I would like to propose that we turn to Mexico, and on the reforms, we will have a back-to-back Mexico-Brazil then in a few minutes. Okay? So thank you very much, and I would like to now fly back to Mexico and discuss with Rubén the situation now in Mexico. First of all, how are Swiss companies positioned in Mexico, and then we'll turn to the impact of the crisis and perspectives for sectors where Swiss companies are very active. So Rubén, you have the floor.
Thank you, Philippe. Well, Swiss firms in Mexico are well positioned. A Swiss product means uniqueness, sophistication, innovation, and top quality. I will share with you some figures about the accumulated Swiss foreign direct investment in Mexico was $7,412 million during the period of 1999 and 2019. Switzerland today is more or less the 9th, 11th largest investor in Mexico. Thus, investment protection is of great importance for the Swiss economy. Bilateral trade with Switzerland was $2,620 million during 2018, which places it as the first commercial partner of Mexico among the countries that make up the European Trade Association, EFTA, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, and Switzerland. There are about 406 companies in Mexico, which generate around 52,000 direct jobs. Mexico is the second most important trading partner of Switzerland in Latin America. During the COVID-19 pandemic, Switzerland was the only country from Europe that created a consortium of Swiss companies for the welfare of Mexico to mitigate the negative economic impact of the COVID-19 and to support the health sector in Mexico. This was recognized by the current government on television. And of course, agencies such as Switzerland Global Enterprise, the Swiss Business Hub, the Swiss Embassy, the Swiss CHAM, and the LATCAM in Switzerland also promoting the export and investment of the Swiss companies in Mexico. Of course, there are so many factors that attract them. As you know, Mexico is one of the most open emerging countries to the FDI. It's the world's 15th largest FDI recipient. And in 2018, the FDI inflows amounted for around $31 billion. The strategic location, excellent supply chains, fiscal stimulus, talent, and job force are just one those attractiveness that investors look for when they come to Mexico. And of course, the network of the 12 free trade agreements with 46 countries. Mexico is considered a hub for North, Central, South America, and Asia Pacific, and participates in multilateral and regional organizations such as the WTO, Asian Pacific Economic Cooperation Mechanism, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, among others. But what is the real attractiveness of Mexico? Well, Mexico takes part in a value chain integration with US and Canada in automotive, aerospace, electronic equipment, and electrical machinery industry. Due to this great integration with the United States market and Canada, Mexico is a major manufacturer of exportable vehicles. The industry produced almost 4 million vehicles in 2018, making the country the fourth largest vehicle exporter. And we look at the States, Mexico is the world's second largest exporter to the US market. Unfortunately, the coronavirus pandemic affected several of these industries. Aeronautical and automotive sectors were on health, and this affected, of course, the Swiss companies. Car production plummeted by 99% on April, which has essentially put the entire industry on hold. According to AMIA, which is a Mexican organization, production should slowly restart from June, but demand will remain depressed in the near term. Mexico has ties with the US country, dominant trade. As you know, Mexico exports almost 80% to the US market, and is also a home to almost 12 million Mexican immigrants. But what has been going on now with the manufacturing between Mexico and the States? There has been intense pressure to reopen the sector. The US government and many car makers that operate in Mexico urge Mexican government to begin reopening the factories as a result of the deep supply chain linkages between both countries. Just for you to know, 40% of parts in US car production come from Mexico, which was severely affecting the American market. Then the Mexican president also agreed to place the manufacturing sector as an essential activity and to relaunch activities on June 15. Nevertheless, there are still questions about how this is going to be implemented to keep the safety measures for the people. So this is what I can share with you that we have done in terms of how the Swiss companies are positioned in Mexico.
Okay, thank you very much, Rubén. I think these are some very insightful and useful information that you are passing to us here. And I think we can only congratulate very warmly the Swiss companies for this initiative of the consortium to mitigate the COVID-19. I think it's a great contribution they are making there. And it's also in line with many things they do. I have been visiting Swiss companies around Latin America, and I was always impressed to see the different programs which they put for the local communities. But here there is a very special and big efforts they are doing, and which will be very much appreciated and will have great benefits for all the person which can benefit from that. Now, looking on the trade side, I look at the numbers a little bit like with Brazil, and I'd like to share with you a few things I have found. The Swiss exports to Mexico from January till April, if we look at this, we see that unexpectedly watches went down by 24%, and also specialized medical and specialized equipment by 35%. But on the other hand, we had some strong data with Mexico on organic chemicals, about plus 40%, pharmaceuticals, plus 14%, machinery, about 4%, and also some electrical machines, some 20%, which also shows the importance of diversification for Swiss companies, because with Mexico, until now, until April, the data had been quite strong. But how do you see for Swiss companies the coming months on the trade side, and when could a recovery point out?
I will split this answer in two parts. First, I will explain why we experience this decline in this sector. If we look at history, and we see that in 2008 was the largest year of Swiss export watches to Mexico with 220 million. This watch boom ran Mexico as the 16th export market for Swiss watches or Swiss exporters. In the last 4 years, Swiss watch exports to Mexico grew approximately 3% annually, up to 218 million in 2019, which is remarkably close to 2018 year level. Meaning that with the 4T, we'd call it the fourth transformation government, the growth rate of the Swiss exports to Mexico began to slow down. So that in March 2020, Mexico already showed a decrease of minus 12.6. If we compare this to what was happening in the States, the export still showed a positive rate of 20. And meanwhile, in the European and Asian markets, were already negative in that month due to the coronavirus. But what explains that? The Swiss watch export to Mexico collapsed based on three main factors: closed factories in Switzerland, social distancing that led to closed shops, department stores, and jewelries, lack of commercial air traffic between Europe and Mexico, which complicated the transportation, the logistics. And during the contingency, the Swiss watching industry in Mexico was confined to do some home office, this leading to a dramatically fall in sales. However, some industries continue working tirelessly, such as jewelers that contacted their customers and sold by phone, or they delivered the product only on an individual appointment. On the other hand, department stores sold on the internet, supply their merchandise from their stores in various parts of the Republic. I would say that it is really difficult and hypothetical to give a forecast for the second half of the year, since this product not only depends on whether it will come from Switzerland, it seems that it will not be a problem, but especially on how Mexico economically downs after the crisis. What is a fact is that we will fall to lower levels than in 2009, and that we will need at least 2 years to recover to those levels again. And also I can explain you that according to a survey carried out by the Swiss Chamber to its affiliates in Mexico, they got some findings. They see that the COVID-19 impact on Swiss investment for future plans, they present different percentages. Some of them believe, 33% believe that their plans for investment won't change. Others, they believe that 20% to 40% will change. 20% believe that a decrease planning investment by 1 to 10%. There are some Swiss obstacles during the pandemic, such as operating below usual capacity, cash flow problems, staff shortages, local supply chain disruption, travel restrictions, bureaucracy, permits, paperwork, disruption of distribution channels. And some of them think that they will get back to normal. So 20% believe that in July, others than in August, September, and 12% even believe that in 2021. But for them, the Swiss biggest challenges are the reduced demand, the travel restrictions, the operating below usual capacity, the international supply chain disruptions, the cash flow problems, the staff shortages, in general, human resources issues. So this is how, why we can explain that we have this decline in exports to Mexico. On the other side, when we talk about those industries that are increasing or are growing, Historically speaking, when we look at the trade balance between Switzerland and Mexico, we observe that pharmaceutical, chemicals, and machines are the most traded goods between the two nations. This is not a surprise. However, during the pandemic, we observed an increase for following reasons. To face the pandemic, there are some medicaments that are being produced or commercialized by Swiss pharma companies in Mexico. Novartis, a pharmaceutical Swiss company, has started importing JCAP that shows effectiveness as a treatment for COVID-19. And this pharmaceutical company donated more than 6,000 bottles of this product, with a value of $2,600 each. But if we look at the manufacturing, what is also growing? Manufacturing is a key economic engine for the country, contributing between 15% and 18% of the Mexico's GDP in any given year. Various states in Mexico have developed important manufacturing clusters, mainly those in central and other regions of the country. Constant investment and diversification in production has positioned Mexico as the 10th largest manufacturing country in the world, with 1.5% share of the global manufacturing. So, machinery and electrical machines are commonly used in the so-called US value chains, production between Mexico, US, and Canada. We believe that after the slump in April, this number changed due to the crisis in the manufacturing industry in Mexico. On the other hand, if we look at the chemical industry, during 2018, the investment was more than $2 million. And chemical industry is a key for global value chains, since it demands inputs from other 30 industrial branches. And parallel to that, it is a supplier of more than 40 branches. We find the chemical industry in the sectors of automotive, aerospace, textile, construction, agriculture, and some of these industries are considered essential, meaning that they did not stop production on commercializing during the crisis. Chemical industry continues to coordinate globally and regionally, support and facilitate supply chains for products essential for combating COVID-19. We believe that these facts explain the growth of this sector of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's all from me.
Okay, thank you very much. I believe you give us some very good insight into some key aspects of the Mexican manufacturing sector, and I would like to ask now Tatiana, because I see it's already past 6 o'clock, if there are some questions which came in from the audience.
Yes, indeed, Philippe, we have 2 questions, both anonymous. The first one is for Philippe Praz. Is Brazil government putting specific measures in place to increase the number of intensive care units for treatment of high numbers of severely infected people? For example, field hospitals.
Yes, I can answer this question. Indeed, the Brazilian government has done a lot of effort to increase field hospitals. And now in Brazil, almost all soccer field, because they don't play football anymore, huh? All soccer fields are almost transformed in field hospitals. So there is in Sao Paulo, there is in Rio de Janeiro, in all main cities, they have increased a lot the capacity of the health sector. And then maybe another point also that you have to keep in mind that the hospital's capacity in Brazil is not bad. If we compare to other countries. For example, at the beginning of the pandemic, Brazilian had like 45,000 place in intensive care. And that's quite a lot. It's more than Germany has. Of course, the population is bigger, but it means the public health sector in Brazilian is reasonably good. And then you have also all the private hospitals, of course. So now we are in the main city where the COVID is really affecting very badly, like Rio de Janeiro, like Sao Paulo. The public sector is around 90% of the capacity, so it's almost reaching the top. The private sector for the hospitals, they are around 75–80%, so they still have capacity. But now they've done also huge effort to implement new capacity with these field hospitals, so all over the country.
All right, thank you, Philippe. The second question is for Rubén. Which are the preventive fiscal measures that Mexican government has announced in order to support companies?
Well, government, if we talk just about fiscal, just the Nuevo León government in Monterrey announced evasion of tax services during April, such as electricity, water, gas, etc. Most other supports are coming more for SMEs with credits, with loans. For example, the Morelos state governor also offered loans for small and medium-sized companies during April and May to pay back within 12 and 18 months at a low interest rate. But there are no really, I would say, significant tax measures or support from the government.
These are the only two questions I have received in writing.
Okay.
I see somebody has raised his hand. But I think the person is no longer there. Or maybe he will write his question later.
Okay.
I give back to you, Philippe.
Thank you very much. We come to the end. But before ending, two more things. The first one is whether Philippe and Rubén could tell us about the major reforms which were underway in Brazil and Mexico. What are the perspective for these reforms based on the major crisis that the two countries are facing? We may start with Philippe in Sao Paulo.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. So coming back to the Bolsonaro government, the economic agenda of the government Bolsonaro was very well received by the business community. The commitment at the beginning was to reduce taxes, to reduce state expenses, to reduce some tariff barriers and not tariff barrier, and to reform the tax system. So that's the reason why it was well received by the business community. And a first important goal was achieved in October 2019 with the reform of the pension system. That was a reform which was extremely important for the financial situation of the country. So that was an important path in this reform journey. Two other important projects of reforms were discussed at the parliament before the COVID-19 has changed the political agenda. That was a tax reform, and that was a reform of the public administration. The tax reform, in my opinion, will be very interesting for the companies. You know that the tax system in Brazil is extremely complicated, and the goal of the reform was not a tax reduction, but it was to simplify the entire system. So that would be a good point. Now, if the government will have enough support for the parliament to get this reform approved, it's a little bit uncertain, because I have to say, on one side, during the COVID-19, the President Bolsonaro has not gained new friends. He rather gained new enemies. So to get the support and have this reform passed will be something difficult. Maybe I can add something on the bilateral sides between Switzerland and Brazil. Where do we stand? Because you, as your long experience at the SECO, you may know or remember that for Switzerland, a solid basis for a good economic relation is these three pillars. It's a free trade agreement, a double taxation agreement, and also an agreement on protection of investment. So at the moment, none of these three agreements are in place in Brazil. But during the past month, we have done some important steps forwards. For example, a double taxation agreement was finally signed in May 2018. This agreement has been approved by the Swiss Parliament in January 2019. And on the Brazilian side, the agreement has already been approved by 3 commissions at the Parliament and is now to be submitted to 2 additional commissions at the Senate before the final approval at the 2 chambers. So if we think positive, we can expect an entry in force by January 21 of this double taxation agreement. For the free trade agreement, as you know, the negotiation was achieved in October 2019. Then the text went through what we call a legal review in Switzerland, and there is still 2 points that has to be clarified now. And for this clarification, we need the delegation need to meet 2 times. One can be done virtually, but the second one must be done physically. And that's now with the COVID difficult to find a date for this physically meeting. After the agreement will be then signed and finally submit to the respective parliaments. And in Switzerland, as you know, the Green Party has already announced their intention to launch a referendum against that. So we will see what will happen. And the agreement of protection of investment could not be negotiated with Brazil, as Brazil does not recognize the OECD standard on these questions, and particularly on the point concerning dispute and settlement by a third court. So the discussion has not go forwards for this aspect. But we have two good points. We have the double taxation agreement. We have the expectation to have a free trade agreement in place also. So that will be 2 major factors to leverage the framework of our bilateral relation.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippe. We take note of these 2 very promising perspectives you just mentioned, and also that some work is still going on vigorously in the parliament in Brazil on simplification of the tax regime in particular. Now I will fly back to Mexico and ask Rubén to give me the major developments referring to reforms and what could we expect.
Thank you, Philippe. Well, as you know, during the Peña Nieto presidency, financial, energy, and telecommunication reforms were approved, and they expected to boost and strengthen the economy in the short and long term. However, we still have the educational reform, the health system reform, pension system, and tax reform pending. To overcome obstacles to growth, such as low level of education, inadequate physical infrastructure, and insufficient incentives to innovate, invest, and engage into formal work. Because in Mexico, almost 60% of population work on the informal sector. To meet these challenges, we need higher levels of public spending. Mexico has to redouble efforts. In 82 of Mexicans between 25 and 64 years old do not have higher education studies, compared to an OECD average of 63%. It is crucial to have an alignment of the higher education system with the labor market. Currently, more than a third of Mexica's graduates hold degrees in business administration or in law, but only 2% in information and communication technologies. On the other hand, this pandemic has highlighted the vulnerabilities and internal fractures in the Mexican health system, which urge to be reformed. The great social inequality is likely to worsen at the end of the crisis, with a marked impact on the many workers in the informal sector who benefit from no social protection. We believe a reforming health sector is also very necessary. Reforms to make pension systems sustainable cannot wait. If we do not take action now in pension systems, we will have a disastrous consequence, and we will become a country of elderly people with great deficiencies. Finally, It has been recommended by the OECD to implement a reform to the tax system, which is a key to ensure stronger and more sustainable growth. This reform should be designed to bring additional revenue without creating distortions. These are the most important reforms that Mexico needs, not only to attract FDI from Switzerland, but from all over the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rubén.
Excuse me, Philippe. I just see we have one more question. Can we take it?
Yes, yes.
It is from Katja Alicia Suarez Katainen. A little question to Philippe, Nell, and Rubén. Thank you. How probable is it is for Swiss companies to expand their businesses to Mexico in the short and medium term, despite the COVID-19 pandemic impact? And what sort of support and incentives would they expect from authorities?
I give you, Rubén, possibility to answer.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have to tell that in some sectors, business or experts have not stopped. We're still getting mandates or projects from Swiss companies to come to Mexico. And I guess those that are essential, they continue producing, they continue commercializing. And as I explained, as Mexico is a manufacturing country, we do depend on global chain supply. And many of these suppliers are also in Switzerland. So the recovery will be steadily and little by little, but I think that investments from Switzerland will fall, but they will not stop. And from the government, it's hard to say it, but from the Mexican perspective, we cannot expect too much. But from the Swiss perspective, as you probably might know, there were some credits and loans announced by the government to support the companies to avoid massive unemployment rates in Switzerland. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rubén. I think time is moving forward, and we could conclude now. I may conclude with 2 points, and then Tatiana may say the final thanks and goodbye. 2 points. The first point, we are very fortunate this afternoon to have 2 guest speakers who are on the front and who work daily with companies who are investing and are trading in Mexico and in Brazil. What we have seen is that both countries have a potential. There is a huge potential, and this is continuing. It is not because there is now a crisis that the economy will not, within a certain time frame, grow again and bring lots of opportunities for business. These are young societies. There are also reforms. Reforms are very important, and sometimes it is one country faces a big crisis, but also it notes how much some reform then should be conducted in order for all the people to be able to aspire to better living condition. But I think the message is quite clear. Up to the end of the year, it's going to remain very, very difficult, but then the upturn will come, and the upturn will open up great opportunities. Now, my final words to our guest speakers and also to the audience who is here is that here from Europe and from Switzerland, we are now in a situation where the pandemic has been contained to a very, very large extent, and where the reopening of the economy is getting pretty much full. But however, we do have a lot of sympathy for Latin America, because we see that Latin America will still take some time in order to overcome this big crisis. We are in a globalized world. We're in a globalized world, and we see it with value chains. We see it with our companies. But there are also some differences in our world. And in order to illustrate these differences, I'm going to read you an email I just received a couple of hours ago. It came from a very poor suburbs in Lima, from a person I have known for a very long time. She was a young girl, and now she's a mother. And she writes me the following: I think it's important for us in order to understand why now in Latin America it is difficult It's going to be difficult, it will be overcome, but it is more difficult than it is here or in the US. And she writes the following. Here, we continue with the quarantine that no longer stops the people to go and sell to the streets. Our district is infected. It is an outbreak of infection. People are more afraid of hunger than the disease. I thank you very much, and I now pass the word to Tatiana for concluding this webinar.
Well, thank you once again, Philippe Praz and Rubén Araiza, for sharing your views, your perspective on the challenges and opportunities in Brazil and Mexico at this difficult time. A big thanks also to Philippe for an excellent preparation and moderation of this session, and also for sharing this very personal email that you received. I hope our audience has appreciated the in-depth and comprehensive discussion. Thank you all once more for being with us, taking the time, and also submitting your questions. We are planning our next webinar in 2 weeks. Until then, I wish all of you all the best. Keep safe and goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you and goodbye. Thank you.